Fancy schmancy sewing words are Today, I'm going to explain 50 of the most popular ones you've probably read or heard somewhere. So we've got no time to waste. My name is Cornelius Quiring. That's my logo. That's my word mark. And Cornelius.o is my website. Up first, we have a sloper, which is sometimes also called a block, sometimes called a bodice, a little asterisk there, we'll get back to that, or even a master pattern. This is a base template that you make using your own measurements, and then you can use this block to create any kind of garment that you want. You can make a top block, which consists of a front and a back panel, as well as a sleeve. And what you're seeing here is a men's top block. A woman's top block is slightly more complex to accommodate more curves. Editing corn, can you overlay a picture of a historical bodice? Yeah, so the word bodice comes from this and therefore more often refers to the top block for a woman. All right, that's the asterisk sorted out. Keep it moving. You can also have a bottom block, which consists of the front and back panels of a pair of pants. Flat pattern drafting is what I just showed you. Anytime you make a pattern on a flat sheet, or even you're buying your patterns on flat sheets, that's flat pattern drafting or a flat pattern. Moulage. Apologies to my francophone viewers. Moulage is a French word for making a sloper or a bodice or sample. But the difference is that rather than it being flat pattern drafted, it's usually done on an actual dress form. Draping, which is kind of like a moulage, in that you're creating on the actual dress form, but a bit more artistic because you're crafting folds, pleats, different shapes on the form, perhaps even draping the fabric to create billowing flows of beauty, you know? A toile, sometimes referred to as a mock-up, or even a sample. So really, toile is the only confusing word here. Once we finish drafting our patterns, we of course need to make a sample or mock-up, or une toile, as my French countrymen might say. The day before our final exam, my grade 9 French teacher sent us home with a sample exam to practice. Yeah, it was just the final exam. Is also the same guy who would show up with his acoustic guitar and just jam for one class or tell us stories about his boa constrictor. A lot of pattern pieces are perfect mirrors of each other, like a shirt, for example. And so rather than drafting both sides, well, we can just make half of it, and then when it comes time to cut out our fabric, we fold our fabric in half, align the inside of that pattern piece with the folded edge of our fabric, cut it out, and boom, we've got our full piece. So that inside line of the pattern piece, that's called the fold line. Sometimes you might be told to cut on the fold, which refers to the process that I just described here. Scripting corn, I'm going to combine these next two together. If you ever see the letters CF or CB, those stand for center front and center back. So you know how we were just talking about the fold line in the middle? Well, that's the center. And then if it's a pattern piece on the front of our bodice, center front. And if it's a pattern piece for the back, that's center back. The inseam is a pant reference, and it's the measurement from the bottom of your undercarriage to your ankles. Armscye, or Scye as it's sometimes shortened to, is simply an armhole. Just a little gaping circle here where sleeve attaches to the body of your garment. Yeah, that's simple. I wanted to figure out the history of the word Scye, or the etymology of the word, and apparently it has Scottish origins, and then as I kept reading, the article didn't make a lot of sense. Allegedly, there was some bad prints of the word Armscye, and it read like Armscye. And that caught on for a while, which makes complete sense, because as soon as I read it, I was like, ooh, Armscye. I could see that, you know, it's a hole, and circle, arm's eye, the eye of the arm. A sleeve cap is that curve at the top of your sleeve pattern. Most patterns you buy have seam allowance included, so what you're cutting around the outside is the cut line. And then a little further in, where you actually sew, that's your stitch line. And the little bit of fabric in between those two, that is your seam allowance. Notches are those little triangles that you usually see on the edge of store-bought patterns. And they're meant to be little helpers so that when you align your two pattern pieces, you align the notches and everything fits together just so. A facing is a strip of fabric on the inside of a garment used primarily to finish the raw edges. The inside of a neck hole is another place you'll often see a facing. To add in ease is to quite simply make something a little looser and more comfortable. A women's bodice is usually quite form-fitting. It's meant to reflect the actual shape of the body. And so when you go to copy it over and make an actual garment, chances are you might want to add in a little bit of ease for a more comfortable wear. This one, it's confused me for too long. It's only after I realized that ease is a concept, but then when it comes to actually adding ease into a pattern, well, there's no shortage of different techniques one has to apply. Like adding ease to a sleeve is very different than adding ease to, say, a torso. If we alter our patterns, chances are that after a while, things aren't going to fit together quite so well anymore. So we have to true up our seams. I've got my front and back pattern piece here, and somehow, mysteriously, the front one is about 1 inch longer than the back. So I would shorten this one by 1/2 inch, extend this one down by 1/2 inch. They would perfectly align, and voila, I have trued up my seams. Slashing, or the slash and spread technique, is a way to adjust the fit of a garment, or even a way of creating a whole new pattern piece. And let me give you another example. This is my sleeve pattern, but I really want to have a gorgeous puff sleeve on my garment. So I go ahead and cut a whole bunch of evenly spaced slashes into my sleeve pattern. I then use the bottom corner of each one of these pieces and pivot it out a little bit, or spread, if you will, and repeat the process in each direction. Redraw the curve at the top here, cut it all out, and what a gorgeous new sleeve I have. When you buy a pattern, there's usually a whole bunch of sizes included. Well, to make all those different sizes, you have to do what's known as pattern grading. And one way of doing it is with the slash and spread technique. I've got my pattern piece here in one size. I go ahead and spread that out a little bit, trace around the outside for my next size up, spread it out an even amount again, trace one more time, and so on and so forth. It's a bit more complicated than that, but you get the idea. Question: how do you plan and organize your sewing projects? Me personally, I've started using Milanote, the sponsor of this video. In fact, Milanote is a tool to organize any kind of creative project. It's an online canvas where you and I can brainstorm and plan all our different creative, and let's be honest, sewing projects. I'm currently looking to make myself a new coat, and so step one was creating a mood board. I could simply drag and drop a whole bunch of images onto the canvas, and as I was organizing my images, I started to notice that there was 3 key themes that kept showing up. Look, I like clean Scandinavian design, but I also like practical functional things, you know? I need to live in this coat. But most importantly, it's got to look good with the hat of my people, you know? All right, I'm ready to start making this thing, so I added a new board to my mood board. After browsing some fabric stores online, I found the perfect black cotton twill. So supple. And yes, shocker, I'm making a black coat. But as someone who loves color, you can drag in as many color swatches as you like and create different combinations until you find one that's perfecto for yourself. But ooh, check out this beautiful print that I'll be using as the lining. Best of all, I can add a link right in the caption, so that way when I'm ready to buy, it's one click away. I can even add a little mini spreadsheet to fully cost out this project. I mean, come on. I've got a price column. I've got a yardage column. And in the third one, simple little sum function. And I've got a final price. And I ain't skipping on the taxes. I'm pricing this thing out to the penny. Finally, Milanote is available for free with no time limits. So sign up for a free Milanote account using my link down in the description. Graphics cord, we're gonna need to pick things up a touch here, so why don't you add a box that represents our fabric, and then we'll add our words and arrows and things as we go. At the very top, let's label this as a woven fabric. And woven fabrics are the normal type of fabrics where the yarns interlace with each other like that. We've got the yarns that run up and down. Those ones are called the warp yarns, and then the ones that go left to right, those are the weft yarns. And the way I always remember which one is which is I use the phrase, weft goes left. On your patterns, you're often going to see a line with some arrows on it, and it's called the grain line. We want the grain line to align with the warp yarns. If you're told to cut something on the bias, or there's mention of a bias cut, that means you want it at a 45-degree angle from the grain or warp of the fabric. And the reason for cutting something on the bias is because it adds a little bit of stretch into an otherwise unstretchy fabric. The cross grain runs in the opposite direction of the grain, or more specifically, it aligns with the weft of the fabric. And then finally, on the edges of the fabric, we have the selvage, which is short form for self-edge. And the reason it's called a self-edge is because the weft yarns wrap back around, go the opposite direction, back around, and back around, and back around, and back around, creating its own self-edge. Say you're shopping online and you happen to see some random number with GSM behind it. Well, that's a way of determining the weight or thickness or heaviness of a fabric. And that GSM stands for grams per square meter. So if we take a piece of fabric that's 1 meter by 1 meter and we weigh it, how many grams is it? Voila, grams per square meter. But of course, why would things ever just be that easy? Because denim, for example, you will often see in ounces. More specifically, ounces per square yard. However, everything is not lost. We can do an easy conversion. If you want to convert from grams to ounces, just divide it by 33.906. Or if you want to do ounces to grams, well then multiply by 33.906. We spoke about woven fabrics, but knits are the other major category. And here, instead of the yarns being interlaced like so, they are looped together, which is also why when you sometimes buy a knit fabric, it comes in a round sleeve rather than a flat sheet. Think stretchy t-shirt fabrics. Depending on which part of the world you come from, you either use a calico or muslin fabric to make the mock-ups of your garments, or toiles, as we discussed earlier. These are usually lower quality and therefore cheaper fabrics, which is why they're used for this purpose. In fact, muslin has become so synonymous with making mock-ups that some folks just say they're making a muslin. And then you're supposed to know that they're making a mock-up. Remember how things aren't always that easy? Well, yeah, muslin fabric in some parts of the world actually refers to cheesecloth, which is a very loose weave, light fabric used to squeeze the juices out of cheese when you're making it. Interfacing is a material that you add to your garment to either strengthen it or give it more rigidity. You can get fiber interfacing, which has a sort of papery, almost plasticky texture to it. And then you have the woven stuff, which is made often out of cotton. You can get fusible, which means it has glue on the back and it can be glued to your fabric. Or you can get sew-in, which means you have to stitch it into place. It comes in various different weights, and then you can get all kinds of specialty options like horsehair and who knows what else. The right side of the fabric is the outside of the garment, the bit you want to see. And then the wrong side is the inside of your fabric. Now, the easiest example of this is a print, where the print is the outside. A more subtle example is sometimes the weave of a fabric will be different from the right to the wrong side, so gotta keep your peepers open for that one. And then sometimes there is no right or wrong side. You can use whatever you want. Oh, and then other people refer to the outside or the right side as the face of the fabric. You know? See? Bits you want to see? Yeah. Nap is the direction a textured fabric will run. So a good example of this is a fur. So the direction the fur is pointing refers to the nap of the fabric. Now, the little fur on the fabric, that's actually called the pile. So if you want to get real fancy with it, you would say the nap of the pile. Velvets and corduroys are other examples of fabrics that also have piles with naps. To pre-shrink your fabric is to very simply just wash it before you cut out anything, because most fabrics tend to a little bit. That's right. Cotton, for example, will on average shrink about 5%. When you're describing a fabric, you're describing its hand. Ooh, you're describing the qualities of the fabric. We can describe how a fabric drapes. A cotton has quite a stiff drape to it. And then this knit fabric here would be considered perhaps bouncy. We can also describe how it feels. Like this fleece that I have here is quite soft. But then also, my canvas, well, that is a little more rugged. To talk about the hand of a fabric is a lot like wine sommeliers talking about their juice, you know? Yeah, that's definitely got some rubberiness to it. I'm gonna say 45% new oak in the barrel. Script writing cord. Is this the part where I tell folks about our pattern drafting sewing classes? Nope. Oh, oops. A basting stitch is a simple in-out stitch done by hand to temporarily hold a couple pieces of fabric together. A stay stitch, on the other hand, is done with a sewing machine, and you do it inside of the seam allowance, usually on something that is curved or cut on the bias. The idea being that it prevents or reduces the stretching of your fabric as you're manipulating it and working with it. A gathering stitch is done when you want to have a whole bunch of fabric squashed together so that it fits onto or into a smaller piece of fabric. Like say a poofy skirt onto a more fitted body of a dress. And the way you do it is on your machine, you just crank up the stitch length to the maximum amount possible, run the stitch across, and then just pull it all in together until it's nice and even. A bar tack is a zigzag stitch done real tight so that it looks like a bar, and it's usually done to strengthen or reinforce different areas. An anchoring stitch or closing stitch is what you do at the beginning or end of the line that you've just sewn, the purpose being that it prevents said stitch from becoming undone. And there's two different ways you can do it. You can go back and forth a couple times, or you can do a handful of stitches in place. Not only is it fun to say, stitch in the ditch, it's also a useful technique. What this means is that I'm simply sewing inside of the dip or ditch of another stitch. I no longer put waistbands on my pants. Instead, I make them a little bit taller and then I put a facing on the inside. Now, to prevent that facing from flapping up and folding around, I stitch it down in the ditch of my side seam and darts in the back. And because I only make black pants, well, Sewing Corn is doing a demo right now with other fabrics and threads and things to make it visible on screen. Darning is a technique used to patch up holes. We cut away all the extra fuzz, add some backing fabric underneath, and then run a whole bunch of zigzag stitches back and forth until said hole is closed up. Now, we can also darn by hand with yarn, and this is often much more pretty and aesthetically pleasing. A dart is when you sew a long, thin triangle shape into your fabric. The purpose of it being is that it creates a bit of a rounder shape, perfect for butts and busts. A placket is a partial opening in a garment, the aim of it being that it makes it easier to put on said garment. This right here is a placket. Another popular place for plackets is by the neck. A pleat is when we accordion style overlap fabric so as to add in more volume. I have a pleat on the back of my shirt here, right by the yoke. A gusset is when we sew a diamond shape into our garments to add more room. So we could put a gusset under our armpits, or you could put a gusset underneath the crotch of your pants because you made them too small and they're too tight and you put so much effort into them, you don't want to throw them out, you want to keep them. And oh, well, those are my pants. Binding is a thin strip of fabric we put around a raw edge. Bias binding is cut at a 45-degree angle so that when we put it around the raw edge and we find ourselves at a curve, that stretch is nicely going to wrap around for a clean finish. Easing in is an extension of gathering, but we just do it ever so slightly so as to pull the fabric together, but not have any actual pleats or folds when we stitch the two pieces together. The best example of this would be putting in a sleeve. We want to ever so slightly gather the sleeve cap so we can sew that curve into the opposite curve of the sleeve. And then when it all folds the right way, it's going to look nice and beautiful and there won't be any odd pulling. And then my favorite word of all, haberdashery. A haberdashery is a store that sells clips, zippers, buttons, all kinds of accessories that you need for sewing, except for the actual fabric. It's just fun to say. Try it. Haberdashery. Haberdashery, haberdashery, haberdashery. And now, let me pass the talking scissors over to you. Are there any words that I have not explained that you're still confused by? Perhaps you've recently learned a new word that you find interesting and you want to share it with the rest of us. Please do so down in the comments. A massive thank you to all the members of the Corncob Club, and a special shout out to these top tier supporters. And oh, what do you get as a member? Oh, good question. Well, you get exclusive content, big old discounts on courses, there's a sewing group chat, and so much more. Just head on over to that URL right there, or hit the join button right here on YouTube, and you too could be one of the juicy kernels on this here ear. And a massive thank you to you for making it to the very, 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 very end of the video. The almighty algorithm thinks that you might be interested in this here video.